Darcel, you all set? Okay, all right. Good morning. Would like to call to order the committee of the whole meeting. Madam Clerk, please call roll.
Commissioner Anderson. Here. Commissioner Basham. Here. Commissioner Baydoun.
Here.
Commissioner Clark Coleman. Here. Commissioner Daub. Here. Commissioner Hattis.
Present.
Commissioner Killeen.
Yep.
Commissioner Marecki.
Here.
Commissioner Baker McCormick.
Here.
Commissioner Scott.
Present.
Commissioner Varga.
Here.
Commissioner Webb.
Here.
Vice Chair Pro Tem Ware.
Present.
Vice Chair Palomero has requested an excuse. Chair Bell,
Here.
you have a quorum present.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Next item, please.
Approval of the minutes from the June 4th, 2019 meeting.
Support.
It's been moved and supported. Are there any changes to the minutes from June 4th? Hearing none. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you. Next item, please.
Unfinished business, there is none listed. We're moving to item D1.
Okay, before we move to item D1, let me first thank staff. This was a lot of information to put together. As you know, this is documents before us are for us to consider the power source for the criminal justice complex. Staff was here till about 7 o'clock last night or after, putting the finishing touches on their analysis. So I just want to thank all of those people, Pam, Joe, Felicia, everyone who was here, making sure that we had the documents. Although we had the paper documents this morning, they came in last night, they kind of rolled in as they completed them. So I want to thank them for their hard work to get this to us today. I'd like to bring to the table those who will be speaking today. I think that's Mr. Kaufman, Mr. Heath, and Mr. Haney. And before we get into the actual items for discussion, I'd like for the administration to give us an overview of why we're here, how we got here, and then we'll go through the items one by one. But I think we need to hear from the administration about the totality of this packet and what it pertains to. So I will, at this time, call on Mr. Kaufman or Mr. Heath, whoever you prefer, to begin the discussion on these items.
Good morning. Thank you very much. I'm Rick Kaufman, Deputy County Executive, and I'm here today with lots of people who participated in a longer than anticipated process to finally get agreement on everything we needed to get agreement in order to finish the Criminal Justice Center. So hopefully I've brought today all the people that have the information that will be useful in answering any and all of your questions as to a complicated deal, a complicated negotiation based on the original deal, and all the people that participated and why they were all necessary in order to finally reach a tentative agreement to present to you. Along with me today is James Heath, our County Corp Counsel, and Kevin Haney, our Budget Director, and Matt McNaughton, our outside counsel during not only this process, but during the original process that came up with the original agreement with ROC to build the Criminal Justice Center. Carter Fisher, Assistant Corporation Counsel, who over the last year probably spent almost all his time on helping bring these agreements to where they are now. Joe Moylan, the county's outside consultant for utility issues, and given that this had to do with actually building the CUP, which is the necessary building in order to provide utilities to all the buildings in the Criminal Justice Center. He was very, very instrumental on so many complicated issues that we worked out. Steve Ohm, you somewhere? Well, Steve Ohm, who heads the team from CGL, is the company that is helping the county ensure that Rock and Barton Malow and HOK build the Criminal Justice Center in the way that is required according to the contract the county has. And hopefully, he's supposed to be here, hopefully he will be here.
Dennis Todd.
And from Edison, who obviously is one of probably the key partner in getting this cup built, we have Doug Cash, who led the Edison effort, and
Todd Dennis. Todd Dennis.
and Todd Dennis. Todd Dennis. Okay, a lot of people here, a lot of potential.
Also like to, Troy Ennis Edwards, who led the effort to get all of the necessary certifications and FEPs for all of the entities who are a part of this, so.
Sorry, Tori. Also, before I get into the underlying explanation of all this, I can't emphasize how much the executive offices appreciate the way in which the chair of this body has dealt with the process to try to get to this point. About a week or two before, on July 3rd, the administration filed with the commission all these agreements and budget adjustments that we believe are necessary to continue and finish the Criminal Justice Center. I had a meeting with the chair and Felicia, and Mark was there? Not sure, I think, and then James Heath and I were there, and Kevin, I think you've been. And we explained what I'm going to explain now as to what's the history of all this being here, and did my best to explain the timing issues, why the timing issues were created. And I couldn't have asked for a better partner to do her best to try to, in a comprehensive fashion, allowing the full vetting of all these to go through, to direct the commission staff to try to get things done in a manner that was beneficial to the entire county. And as a result of that direction, we could not have asked for more professionalism, competence, and efficiency in the way the commission staff, particularly Joe Slijak, Terrence Adams, Felicia Johnson, Regina Jones, Mark Abbo, and Pam Lane, dealt with us and did their best in the way that I indicated to try to get the information they need. I know it was not as much time as I'm sure they would have liked, but they were very sensitive, as the chair was, to the timing of what was necessary, and we greatly thank you, no matter what way this goes, as I said, to your professionalism, competence, and efficiency in allowing it to get to the point it's at. So when all of these filings were made on July 3rd, I also drafted and sent to every commissioner a letter from me, about a 3-page letter, that hopefully would give background to the terms of these many agreements and the way in which we propose to pay for them. I hoped all the commissioners had a chance to read it. I guess if I was going to fully explain what I think is the relevant history behind how we are here today with all these agreements, a full explanation would be to read this letter. I did my best to comprehensively explain it to the commissioners right off the bat, the minute of filing. This is pretty much the same explanation that James and Kevin and I gave to the chair and Felicia a week or two before we filed them. So if anybody wants me to read it, I'm happy to read it. I'm going to try to paraphrase it a little bit, but I do think it has important information. And if my initial summary has too many unanswered questions, I'm happy to go back in more detail, which I tried to do in the letter. We negotiated with ROC for about a year and a half before we reached what I refer to as the definitive agreement, which has a much longer name, purchase and sale agreement. That agreement was approved by the commission a year ago, June, and it had one big open issue. And that was the issue of building and paying for the cup. It was clear at the time that agreement was approved that that still had to be negotiated, that it was generally the understanding between ROC and the county that the county would pay for the cup. But because we only had oral estimates of what it was going to cost, notwithstanding ROC's great disappointment, the county refused to sign an agreement committing it to the cost of something that we didn't know what the cost would be. We anticipated from discussions with various entities, particularly the leadership of DRE, which was right across the street, had a number of discussions with them. Lots of reasons seemed to suggest they would be clearly the most economical supplier, both in capital cost and the cost of the utilities. And the time it would have taken to get to a definite number likely would have resulted in the estimated cost of building the Criminal Justice Center going higher and delaying significantly the start of it. Both of those would have had a significant injurious effect to the county. The first one, the obvious, which was the delay that we thought would be about 6 months, because of what happened at DRE, has turned out to be about a year and a quarter. That delay is estimated in the tens of millions if we had not started construction, which will be a year ago this September. Furthermore, time has shown that the concern on the part of the county, which when we first started negotiating with ROC, the estimated entire cost of building the Criminal Justice Center was $420 million, and we were at $533 million when we signed the agreement. ROC has already announced that they're $40 million over budget as it is. And there's no way, if they knew that 40 million was coming and we had not signed an agreement, and we're sitting here a year and a quarter later, now knowing what the cost of the cup is, that they would not also have required us to share in the extra $40 million overrun, which by our initial agreement, we are not responsible for any of it. What happened was, first week of June of 2018, the commission approves the agreement. Within a month, I think it was a couple weeks, we get notice that DRE has been sold. All the top executives and managers at DRE that we had dealt with and relying on and having some idea what the cup would cost were all fired. A new team came in and made us a proposal to build the cup for somewhere between 47 and 52 million. Instead of at that point, when the commission had approved the original, what I call the definitive agreement, and we had expected to begin negotiations with the top staff of DRE that were there then, which we anticipated we would have an amendment, we would have an agreement with DRE, we would have an amendment to the definitive agreement, and sometime in September or October of last year, be ready to bring to this body an amendment to build the cup, which we anticipated would be 15 or 20 million. Anyway, that event started a very long process, starting with us bringing in DTE, us meeting with and getting proposals from DET and DRE to try to determine which was the best to go with. It became clear during the process that not only did we start to have concerns about DRE and how solid a company it was going forward, it would not reduce its offer. DTE came in, and in the opinion of, I know, executive staff, CGL, all the people working on the county side, ROC, Barton Malow, HOK. Barton Malow is the builder, HOK is the designer. DTE was much more professional, had done this before many times, and their price kept coming down to the point now where what we have submitted to you is a contract for the cup to be built in two separate contracts. One is a direct contract between the county and DTE, and one is an amendment to the definitive agreement with ROC for them to build the shell. Together, those two have a guaranteed maximum price of about $37 million, but an estimated price of about $32 million. Now, the reason those are different is because we never thought it would take this much time to have a cup, but when DRE's top staff left, who indicated what they needed to enter into a contract with the county to build it, in retrospect, they didn't know what they were doing. Both DRE and DTE needed a lot more definitive design documents from HOK to really understand what the cost was. And skipping a lot of detail, we are now at the point where they have design documents, which is enough to support a guaranteed maximum price, but they can't know precisely what it's going to cost to build this, at least until they get the construction design documents, which is the last detailed documents a designer makes to give to the builder in order to bid it out. Those construction design documents are due August 31st, and once they get those, then both DTE and Barton Malow are going to reassess the guaranteed maximum price and be able to see whether or not what they think is the right estimate, how far they can come down on that. So we have given to you in those two agreements, both the agreement with DTEES, DTE's got a bunch of different parts we have separate agreements with, which are the ones constructing the CUP. The most it could cost the county, and what we think it's going to cost the county. Now, why don't we wait to get the construction design documents, see how low the guaranteed minimum can go before entering to this? And the answer is time. We can talk about blame, and I'm sure we will, about why we're in this timing situation, and I will do my best to give as candid answers as how we got to this point, and I'm trying to do it in this explanation, that if we didn't start the work of DTE Electric by June 1st, and if we didn't get the bigger contracts with DTEES and the amendment to the definitive agreement approved by August 1st with respect to DET Electric, September 1st with respect to all the other ones, significant costs, damages for delay would start to set in. Because obviously there's a coordination in building something this large. You plan to have this done so this can start, and if you don't have this done and you can't start something big here, you start getting into hundreds of thousands, millions, sometimes tens of millions in extra cost. And in order to do our best to avoid those delay costs, it was very, very difficult negotiations for a year, and in the last few months, recognizing the alternative of not getting this done timely, the county and DTE and ROC and Barton Malow and HOK, given their different interests, worked hard, made compromise to come up with what I do believe is a very beneficial agreements for the county. Yes, this CUP, if you look at it in isolation, is likely to cost about $10 million more than at least I had anticipated it being when you bring in what I think the final cost will be when the final cost is closer to the estimates than the guaranteed, and the fact that ROC, after saying for years, we will never pay a penny for any of this, agreed to pay $2.5 million of the price. So my letter is more detailed. The summary is basically that based on what occurred and how we handled the curveball, I think we're ending up in a much better position. One, we're getting our power through Edison. not a company that was way higher than Edison, and now we know wouldn't even been around to service us. And we get rid of what I consider, and I think most have considered, a real nuisance to the city of Detroit, the people around it, now that they've shut down operations. By agreeing to, and this body approving, a definitive agreement with ROC with this issue open, we did not expose ourselves to at least $40 million in overruns, and the construction is on time. If we had waited for all that occurred to occur, we'd be about 1.25 years later in starting this process. And the 1.25 years later, no doubt in my mind, would have increased our costs way beyond the share that ROC would have required us to take of the overruns they would have known about, and just the normal tens of millions from a project starting 1.5 years later. That's where we are. I do think it is not fun to come here and tell you about this surprise, but I do believe if you look at this as a whole, the county is in a much better position agreeing to this amendment to the definitive agreement, the last major agreement needed in order to finish the Criminal Justice Center, than we would have been had we tried to wait and get a final number on what the cup would have cost. Anyway, there's more I could say. I think that gives pretty much the picture of how we're here, and thank you for that opportunity.
Okay, thank you. Let's have 2 general questions, and I'll open it up to other commissioners for general questions, and then we'll go item by item for specific questions. But one, what is the new estimated completion date of the Criminal Justice Center?
It's not new, it's the summer of 2020.
Still summer of 2020?
Yep.
And after DRE?
I mean,
2022.
I
2020.
wish.
Yeah, no,
I wish.
2022.
Summer of 22.
Okay, and then after DRE closed, were there any other, or are there any other companies that could perform this other than DTE?
That's a really good question, and it's a point I missed. We did have the option at the point that DRE was not only not a sure thing, but an unlikely thing, to go out for a competitive bid. And yes, there are companies around the country that do this. But having talking to DTE and analyzing, starting with the competition between DRE and DTE, as opposed to doing an RFP, which we anticipated could have taken 6 months to a year to actually put an RFP together for this, get bids and go through everything. That delay, we concluded, would have cost way, way more than any chance of savings, either in the combined, the savings, when you look at the pure cost of building the cup and operating versus the delay to this project that was already started. So that's why the decision was made not to go through a formal RFP.
Okay.
And if I could add one
Sure.
thing to that, the coordination that we received in the process with DTE Electric and DTE Gas would not have been possible had this not been taken as a whole. And so I think that's just one example of the added time and cost that the Deputy County Executive is describing.
Okay. I have Commissioner Basham on the list. Commissioner, do you have a general question, or did you want to wait till we go through each item?
Yeah, it's just general. First of all, the words are important, and I appreciate the fact that we mentioned tentative agreement here, so, and prior to this meeting, I had this presented to me. It's about 3 inches diameter of papers that I had 22 minutes ago before our meeting. So I'm a fast reader, but not that fast. I talk slow, but I read fast, but not that fast. So basically 22 minutes to read 3 inches of paper. I would hope that somewhere in this 3 inches of paper, there's language relative to auditing, being able to audit this. Can somebody answer even that generally? Because we absolutely need to be able to audit Wayne County's properties, Wayne County's monies, those sorts of things. And the other thing, this is a complicated issue. I hope I didn't give you any of those gray hairs. I probably did, but anyway, I know it's a complicated issue. I know it's like herding cats, but the mere fact that the commission itself, who actually has a vote, hasn't seen this paperwork, and we only had 22 minutes, is troubling. But I'm hoping that we do have audit language in there.
The answer is yes. All these contracts, you certainly, in detail, with your staff's help, went through all the auditing and the processes and the procedures and the laws and all of the processes we have set up in order to do all that. All those that were set up with the original agreement apply to all these contracts.
Thank you.
Thank you. And these documents started going out last night, about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. As they were completed, they started going out. That's why I urged everyone to make sure they check their email so they could start reading them throughout the evening into the night into this morning. And again, we're going to discontinue this paper system coming soon. So, and we'll be relying more on our electronic versions. But we did try to get this out as soon as it came. And this was a rolling process as it came. As they completed it, it came out. They completed it, came out. So, Commissioner Marecki.
Just a quick question, James. So you're saying that we would have had separate RFPs for the electric and the gas if we hadn't gone together with DTE?
No, I guess what I'm saying is that the fact that we were at the time in negotiations with DTE Energy Services for the construction and operation and maintenance for the CUP, that fact assisted and gave some comfort to DTE Electric and DTE Gas to begin the general work that they needed to do that would allow them to have the lines run to the CUP
Okay.
in time for us not to remain or not to get off of schedule.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Commissioner Clean.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know how you want to handle this, Madam Chair, but given we've got like 7 or 8 votes to take today on different pieces of this elephant, and sometimes when you go through them one by one, things get lost as you go from one to the other. We've had an overview from administration on this. I would request we got a one-sheet fiscal summary on this that before we really start talking the individual pieces that I'd like Commission Fiscal to run us through so that we see the big picture fiscally. And I would request the same thing from Commission Council to, in a large sense, we'll get into some details in each individual one, but to give an overview from our legal counsel as to where we are at with this and any issues overriding issues that she sees may be appropriate. So I don't know how you want to handle it, Madam Chair, but I'd like to get an overview from our staff, our fiscal and our legal staff, before we get into the details of each individual one.
Okay, let me get the commissioners with general questions first, and then we'll have a brief summary from Mr. Abel and Ms. Johnson. Commissioner Anderson?
Thank you. Mr. Kaufman, I guess I'm a little confused as to why in the original agreement with Rock, it indicated that if there's not an agreement with the original provider for power, one that was expected to be the provider, it says, the exact word I'll read from it, if developer and county are unable to reach such an agreement with Detroit Renewable Energy, they will negotiate in good faith regarding a resolution of the responsibility between them and for any increased costs, design changes, and schedule impacts associated with providing or obtaining from a different provider energy heating and cooling for the Criminal Justice Center, which shall be a material term of this agreement. How does that disappear and they say we're not going to pay for it and we accept $2.5 million?
Well, I cited that provision about 10 times to Rock during the negotiations, and he said, we did that in order that we could have a contract to submit to the commission. That we made it clear that when the budget of this went from $420 million to $533 million, and you stayed at $380 million, we were done. We're overpaying for this property, and we're making it clear that even though you are refusing to sign a provision that commits the county to an unknown sum, and the only way to draft it, if neither one of us is going to commit to an unknown sum, is to say that at some point we have to negotiate what the sum is and who's going to pay for it. I knew our lawyers, none of the lawyers knew any way to draft it given those circumstances. So the only way to keep it an open issue and say that we're going to have to wait to see what the number is before the county is going to commit to it, is to have a provision that says when we finally get what the number is, the parties are going to have to negotiate. But orally, during the whole time, they made it clear that their view, their reasonable decision, given the history over the last year and a half as to where we got to, that they were not going to pay any more money. They ended up paying some, but even when Zena and I came to the commission to discuss the definitive agreement, I think it was made clear all those underlying circumstances.
You being an attorney as many years as you were an attorney and having been a judge and being a important part of the staff, the administration, I think I'm surprised to hear you. It's almost like you accepted the oral argument versus the written argument or the written document they signed that said they would negotiate in good faith. And to me, them getting away with paying $2.5 million towards this additional cost amounts to about 6.5% if you take the prices at 38, and I think we're going to find that the cost is going to be, to the county, is going to be much more than $38 million. So I don't know how that's good faith. I don't know how, I was thinking to myself, I would certainly rather the other side be negotiating on behalf of us if that's the kind of deal we're going to get. That's a problem to me, why we would not hold them to that agreement, and we would just accept them saying, well, we're not going to do it. Now, what's the next thing? When there's another increase in cost, and they say we're not going to pay it, are we going to roll over then? That's my concern where we're going by accepting or allowing them to backtrack on a written agreement that they signed. And so I guess that's sort of a general question. But I appreciate that you tried to answer it.
Can I just add
Sure.
couple of things? There are no other provisions left where this kind of negotiation will be required, is number one. And their basic position that they thought was in extremely good faith was we told you all along that based upon where we are on the cost, we don't think it's fair that we contribute everything. And they said, and now we sit here today, $40 million worse than we were then. Now, anybody can have their opinion on what's good faith or wasn't, and whether or not that is sufficient for them to have budged their position a little bit by covering the 6% or 2.5 million, but that is what their position was.
Yeah, I'm used to dealing, and I know there's others around the table, with some contracts, and it's what's in writing that counts. It's not what someone says, well, I'm not going to do this, or I'm not going to do that. It's, you go buy a car. It's your contract amount is what both parties are obligated to. And like I said, for them to go boo-hooing already, that they're $40 million over budget already, that's considerable. Everybody would concede that. But they knew that going into the contract with the county. That's discounting, not talking about the increase in the value of the property they got in exchange for it. There's been increases, I'm sure, in the value of that property. So that does not, in my opinion, does not justify allowing them to get away with this paltry contribution to this additional cost. But that's what I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Dopp?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Kaufman, forgive me if this is common knowledge, but I wasn't on the commission last year when this deal was approved. But I'm wondering, why weren't the detailed construction plans drawn up at the same time as the architectural plans for the whole project?
I'm certainly, Rock is wishing they were, because that contributes to the fact that there's a $40 million overrun. We started the negotiations with what we had. We continued to negotiate until we got to the point where Rock was willing to accept a budget for it. The county was committed to paying a certain amount of that budget. The county was committed to paying $379.9 million. Budget was 533 point something. And Rock was 100% responsible for any cost overruns. So whether Rock now is wishing they had waited for those things may be true, but from the county's perspective, because we had the guarantee of Rock paying 100% of the overruns, we were sufficiently protected.
Okay, so the county drew up the plans for the jail complex, is that correct?
HOK,
Okay.
who is a contractor to Rock.
Okay, and they did everything except the central utility plant? But was there a specific reason why they did not draw up plans for that at that time?
Well, timing. They were moving to have the design plans that would be sufficient for Rock and the county to know what we were getting. And when we finally had sufficiently detailed design plans that included additional exhibit of hundreds of pages of specifications, our consultant, CGL, who builds these things too and designs them, was comfortable that the county had enough from the design documents and the specifications to be able to know precisely enough what we were getting. And it was only at that point we were willing to present to the commission a contract that, in our opinion, guaranteed what we needed. And so far, it's proved to be more than adequate.
Okay, all right, thank you.
to that point.
To that point, and
Yeah, to
then
that point.
Commissioner Baker McCormick.
Is the utility, the utility cup and the whole issue of utility is considered overrun now, or it's considered as a cost was not dealt with, to be dealt with later on?
The
So
latter.
they're different between
Yes.
overrun and something.
The 40
we
million
spend
has
on.
nothing to do with the building of the cup. It's the rest of the complex. So this contracts to build the cup are separate from the $40 million overrun.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Baker McCormick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I just want to hit on the point that Commissioner Anderson made. And it states clearly that ROC would be responsible for any overruns. And it is in the contract. And then secondly,
But I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a specific provision
okay,
that says cup doesn't apply to that.
okay. Where is that provision? Maybe it's somewhere in here, but I didn't see
Section
it.
4.1 of the original development agreement. We can get you a copy of that if you don't have it, Commissioner.
Okay. And it says with the exception of the utilities and.
That's,
the cut.
so, that's correct. So that section indicates, as Judge Kaufman has said, that the parties would negotiate to solve the cup issue, the central utility plant issue. That is separate from the overrun costs that ROC is obligated to pay for the building of the entire project.
Okay,
So that's a
So,
separate
separate,
provision. And so
okay.
that's correct.
okay. So, yes, if I can find that somewhere in this or anywhere. Okay, thank you. And 36th District Court was able to opt out, and did that cause the costs overrun to reconfigure the location of where they would have been?
No, that's a
Is that-
very good question. When the,
And why were they just allowed to opt out? I guess I'm just curious how that happens, you know?
the story goes back to years ago when the Supreme Court sent in Court of Appeals Judge Michael Talbot to help make the court more efficient. One of the problems that he identified was that doing the preliminary exams on the felonies at the 36th District Court was causing problems. One, you had to transport the prisoners there instead of doing it at the Murphy Hall of Justice. A lot of the cases were getting adjourned. Witnesses weren't showing up, and this was causing an increase in the jail population. So everybody agreed that it would be more efficient to move those felony exams to the Murphy Hall of Justice.
Okay.
They were there for 2 or 3 years. And it was discovered, I discovered, that one of the things that was not dealt with when the move was that Wayne County sheriffs replaced 36 district court security guards to provide security for those 4 courtrooms. So putting aside any rent payments, putting aside utility costs, the county was paying almost $1 million for the security for those courtrooms that is not legally the county's responsibility. And we were not paying these before the move. So I raised the issue, and over a couple months, the county negotiated with the city and the 36th District Court, and we compromised, and they 36th District Court started paying the county $550,000 a year. Because although there's an argument the county should recoup all those expenses, legally they're not ours, the county was getting a benefit from having the preliminary exams in the Murphy Hall of Justice. One, we saved the transportation costs, and we saved the costs of not having the population of the jail swell because of delays in the preliminary exams. After a couple years of that, and after we had put in the new criminal justice building, these 4 courtrooms, anticipating we would continue to hold them there. About a few months after this board approved the agreement with that, the chief judge of the 36th District Court, who legally is the only one who has the power to say, I'll let these occur in another place, or I want them back, said she wanted them back. Over a period of months, the county executive's office, the sheriff's office, the Wayne County Circuit Court, Wayne County Clerk's Office, I may be leaving 1 or 2 out, held a series of meetings, one particular one at the end, where we all begged the judge of the 36th District Court not to do what she was threatening to do. And we all explained to her the benefits that occurred from keeping him there. And nonetheless, the only benefit she cited was we're the only district court in Michigan that doesn't do our own exams in our own place. And we tried to explain the 36th District Court was kind of a unique kind of court, given it's in Detroit and given all these reasons. Nonetheless, she said no. So at that point, we didn't need those 4 courtrooms. And we found another, arguably a more important need, which is the probation officers who are in a building across from the Murphy Hall of Justice now would have been remote. And with probation officers, they're state employees, but the county is responsible for the housing costs. So after a lot of analysis, it was quite advantageous to remove 3 of those courtrooms and put those probation offices in the Murphy Hall of Justice. That will have a significant savings to the county, and there'll still be 1 extra courtroom that the chief judge of Circuit Court, who was chief judge of criminal at the time, thinks will be very beneficial for various things. So we had some arguments with Rock as to how you calculate the cost on this change. The final agreement is it's going to be about $400,000, $500,000 cheaper to build the probation offices than it would have been to build the 3 courtrooms. And therefore, based on language in the contract, those savings go to the project, which means the $40 million estimate that Rock came up with for the overrun includes the fact that they're saving about $400,000 on this change, and the county is getting something very valuable to it.
Okay, thank you. And then the last question is the parking area. Why hasn't Rock purchased that yet?
According to the parking concession that was an agreement approved by this body at the same time it approved the definitive agreement, it has certain time frames. It has property that has been bought with money budgeted for the criminal justice system, and I can't remember the exact dates. James may know them. I think it's a year or a year and a half before the scheduled completion date, the original agreement required the property that was bought within a certain area for Rock to choose that property that would create 1,500 spaces.
So they have an option to purchase in place, or I guess I'm not understanding what.
They have to, of the property they purchased, identify enough of that property that is within a certain area close to the criminal justice
To
system.
carve out the parking.
Enough spaces to accommodate 1,500.
So they already own it?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I wanted to be clear
All
on.
right.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
That time period is 2 years, Commissioner, from the original signing of the definitive agreement.
They
So
have
a year
to-
from now, they'd have to
Put
make
the-
that determination.
Okay.
And also, there's, as a result of our not having to pay the rent for those MDOC employees, Judge Coffin mentioned, that's a savings of about $400,000 a year to the county.
Okay.
Madam Chair, to that point.
To that point,
The 1,500 spaces you're talking about, as I read it, again, I'm not as good a reader as I should be, or not an attorney, but it says it goes from 1,500 to 1,386 spaces?
Yeah. The original agreement called for 1,500. The CUP, it was determined, originally it was going to be located on property right across the street from the Criminal Justice Center. When we finally agreed that DTE was the far superior partner with respect to building the CUP, there was a decision made to move the CUP from across the street to on-site. And the place that it's going on-site removes about 150 spaces that were otherwise available. So the county had a choice to pay $2.6 million to keep those 1,500 spaces, or pay nothing extra and reduce the requirement on Rock to 1,360-something, I think it is. We chose the latter, and as we get closer to finishing it, we will, and a bunch of those, some of those spaces have to do with the DTE substation that we anticipate will be removed at some point during the process, and I think it's 70-some additional spots can be there. But that's why it went down to the 1,500 to the 1,360.
okay. Okay, we have 3 more speakers, then we're gonna let Mark Abel speak, Felicia speak, and then we're gonna get into the items, because I think when we get into the items, we're gonna generate even more questions. And I do wanna probably break at 12:30, then we'll have lunch, then we'll come back. So, next speaker is Commissioner Baydun.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Judge Kaufman, I'm also one of the commissioners that wasn't on the commission last year. You mentioned earlier that you had anticipated that the CUP cost in the future after the agreement was signed, you didn't expect it to be $10 million more than what you had envisioned at the time, I guess. Were you being advised, or was the county being advised by an expert as to what the possible cost of the CUP might be in the future?
Yes, it turned out to be wrong, but discussions not only with the top officials at DRE, but discussions with CGL and HOK, the designer of it, and they turned out to be wrong.
Now, on the cost overrun of the project, obviously the county is not on the hook. They're already over 40 million. That seems to be a very high number. And I'm just wondering, from my perspective, what is the reason for that? Is it the lack of labor or the cost of material? Or will that number double maybe by next year? And is that going to affect us as a county? What if ROC comes in and says, they want to renegotiate? They cannot, obviously, based on the language you have in the contract, they cannot renegotiate the contract.
No, the county is protected from any of these cost increases, no matter how much they go. And the basic answers to your question are the trade war with China and the cost of materials, and two, the unanticipated increase in the cost of construction in Detroit in the last year or so. Detroit's got some of the highest construction costs in the country. They were budgeting this at the time based upon historic construction costs in Detroit. They're kind of through the roof now with all the projects that are going on in Detroit.
And my final comment and question, were you hoping that when the time comes to negotiate the cost of the cup, were you hoping that ROC would pick up like at least maybe 50% of the cost, 60%, or did they throw you off when they said we're only going to pay $2.5 million?
I anticipated them spending zero if it was less than 20 million.
Okay.
But if I could have brought to this body a fixed figure of 20 million or less for the cup, I would have put it in the original agreement. Whether you would have approved it, obviously, it would have been your call. But I could not get a guarantee on that, so that's.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Marecki?
Okay, that kind of answers my question. I didn't know if you thought the original cost would be 10 million, but you thought it would be 20 million.
The highest estimate I was given was 15 to 20 million.
Okay.
And I knew that at the time, and so for me to go to ROC and say to them in this negotiation that you should pay below 20, I didn't think was a very strong argument. My initial position with them was that we were both at risk and that we should both split 50-50 any amount over 20.
Okay.
That was my original position.
So their contribution of $2.5 million, that would be a higher percentage if it was a $20 million project at this point. Okay, thank you.
And Commissioner Scott?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am wondering if the land has been cleared of all hazardous waste, or is this something that is still ongoing?
The land where the CJC is being built?
Yes.
Yeah, all the underground work is pretty much done. Very soon, we should see project coming out of the ground. Commissioner Anderson heads a body that, as I understand, has participated quite a bit in discussions on the pollution issue. And as of now, it is our anticipation that all the things that need to be cleaned are out of the ground, and the cost, there was a separate line item for $500,000 that would be used to pay for these cleanups, that it looks as of now that we will be within it, and if we're not, it will be very small amount above it.
So there's no cost overrun on that, you're saying?
Can't guarantee we're not over, but as of looks now, it looks like we will be within the 500, and if we're not, it'll be a very small amount above it.
When do you anticipate that would be cleared up?
You know, I think pretty soon, because we're looking to get all the bills for the environmental work that did occur and getting some tanks out of there and other things we had to do. So it's not a question of doing the work anymore, it's the final bills. What do you anticipate?
No, that's right. We hope to have that information in within several weeks, and if you're at Commissioner Anderson's committee tomorrow, you'll see him beat me over the head about when those reports are going to be in. But we've been discussing it, I think, probably for 3 months since we began this process. So we're in a matter of days or weeks when we'll know where we are in terms of the final bills for the environmental cleanup that has occurred. And once we get that information, we will submit it to the special CJC committee as well as to, through the chairwoman, and it'll be disseminated to all commissioners.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. And we have two to that point. First, Commissioner Baidoon, then Commissioner Anderson.
To that point, Mr. Kaufman, I toured the facility about 3 weeks ago, and the proposed site where the cup is supposed to be built now, there's an existing structure right now. I believe it used to be to power the building that was there. I don't think that's been demolished. Is there any environmental concern as far as that piece of land where the cup is going to be built?
You're talking about the Edison
Yes,
DTE substation?
yes.
No,
That's not the responsibility of the county?
Well, it's not where the cup is going to be built, first of all.
Oh, okay.
Cup is going to be built in the back of the U area where the jail and criminal justice court.
Oh, I misunderstood because I was told that could be the spot where they're going to build the cup. Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then Commissioner Anderson.
To Commissioner Scott's question, we have asked numerous times about that issue and whether or not we're over budget. We have been told by our CGL representative that they are not going through and clearing the entire property, but as they are starting to dig. And someone correct me if I'm wrong, but that was what we were told in the committee, so it doesn't sound like it's quite as far along, unless something's happened since we were told that in committee, that it was as footings are being dug, that's how they discover whether or not there's anything that has to be removed or remediated.
That's right, but since we've had our conversations, we've continued to, go through and do an analysis of the environmental status of things. And so the reports that we're going to be forwarding to you in short order, we think will give you a comprehensive view of what's under the ground and what we need to be concerned about.
So are all the footings that will be dug that might discover those things, those are already dug, everything? Because I didn't think they were quite at that point yet.
If you don't mind, I'll ask Steve Ohm from CGL to give you an exact report on all the footings and whether they've all been dug or not. So we can give you that information at our committee meeting tomorrow if you're open to that.
Yep, last Commissioner, Commissioner Webb, and then we're going to go to Mark Abbo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And we're still under the general.
General question.
Okay, yeah, so this is part of, I guess, the big picture. So, because I look at the overall budget and the impact on the taxpayer and the impact on the county's finances as far as the overall costs, the debt service, how long we're going to be paying it, what the current state of the economy is, if it tanks, if we're going to be able to come up with the $30 million a year. I look at all those things when I make these kinds of decisions. So, it's been brought to my attention on more than one occasion by the judicial that, they lost the last electrical feed to the Lincoln Hall of Justice. Providing a juvenile court is a mandatory function. And right now, we're spending $3,000 to $4,000 a day in diesel fuel running generators to keep that building alive. And there's no part of that's not even part of this plan. So, I don't know if you guys are entertaining what we're going to do with that. Is that going to be something else? So you're going to be coming back to us in the near future looking for another $40 to $50 million to replace the Lincoln Hall of Justice? Do you have a plan?
Yes. We haven't submitted the HOK contract?
No, we're still waiting on.
Thank you.
They talk amongst themselves.
I'll address if you like.
James will explain what we plan to do, but basically, we are going to present to this body shortly a tentative agreement with HOK, the designer of the CJC, contract for them to study, analyze, and propose a civil justice center, like the criminal justice center, like the contract that the county has with the court that requires us to do it, to design it for the present property that the Lincoln Hall of Justice is on, with two phases. Phase one would be the juvenile court first, and second would be all the other parts of the civil justice system according to the contract we have with the court, which is the circuit court civil, the circuit court family, the front of the court, and we'll obviously put the probate court in there too. I've been working very closely with Judge Kenny. I think he's, given the circumstances and the issue, I think he's quite pleased with how we're progressing together and trying to solve that real problem.
So after the wave of contracts you're reviewing right now, you'll be receiving, for your review, a contract with HOK to provide that feasibility study. We have the agreement worked out in terms of the terms that you will be considering. We're waiting on FEP documents from the contractor such that we'll have a complete package, but you'll be able to begin the process of picking apart exactly the plan that you're asking about, Commissioner.
Do you have any idea what the price tag is going to look like?
For the entire project, or for the feasibility study that we're describing?
Both.
I'm more comfortable telling you about the feasibility study, and I believe it's less than $300,000. It's in the range of $250,000 to $300,000.
You have no estimates on what it's going to cost to replace the Lincoln Hall? I mean, it makes sense to me that you're...
You won't give them, but I'll give them.
Okay. Well, number one, it makes sense to me that you would do it where we already are the property, for one thing. Another thing, it's a mandated function. I mean, this, one of the reasons I wasn't supportive of this deal to begin with is we were replacing the juvenile detention facility that's not a mandated function, when we had the juvenile court that was on life support that is a mandatory function. So it's a mandatory function. We have to do that. So I understand that we have to do that. I'm just looking at the total comprehensive cost to the taxpayer once we're done with this, and then we're going to go back and ask for that. And so, is it, I think it cost us about $45 million to build the juvenile detention facility when we built it independently. So I don't know if you have any, I never built it.
Very rough numbers.
Yeah.
About $50 million to build the new
Juvenile part.
juvenile court, and about $200 million to build the whole thing.
Okay.
But the good news is that the amount, this is also the good news of the Criminal Justice Center in terms of how much savings there will be to the county when we actually start operating. It's even as or more significant with the Civil Justice Center. By building the Civil Justice Center, we get out from under the capital upkeep of it, which is a building falling apart. We're trying to keep it together. We've been as interested in trying to get a new one as you do, although we haven't done it as fast as we would have liked. We will save the millions of dollars of rent in the Penobscot building for the friend of the court. We will hopefully work out a deal with the city to sell our third ownership in the KMAC for a reasonable price, because we won't need it anymore because we'll be moving out of that building. And when you put all those numbers on the blackboard, there should be an operational savings going forward. So when you combine that operational savings with the bond debt, we're pretty even. Obviously, there'll be upfront costs before we get going, but just like with the Criminal Justice Center, that we anticipate 20 to 30 millions a year in operational savings. It's true when you replace old buildings and you get out from under millions of dollars of rent a year.
I understand that, and I appreciate that. I appreciate those points. I'm sure if we're spending $3,000 to $4,000 a day in diesel fuel, that's got to be enormously cost exorbitant. And so, the obvious savings in replacing that building are going to be tremendous, and I'm glad that you're going to start with that building because that's the one that's in the worst shape. You know, I'm just looking at the overall impact to the county's bottom line, like with the budget, you know, how much more we're going to have to generate in taxes, you know, to pay for all of this. I mean, the $250 million number to build the civil court.
No, 200, it's 50 plus 150 for the 200.
I'm sorry.
200 is the total number.
Oh, okay.
50 was the total.
Oh, 50 for the juvenile court and then another 150 to replace the rest of the civil courts. Okay, I'm glad that we got that straight. But, you know, if you look at all of these different costs, that'll take us over $1 billion. Well over. So, anyway, thank you.
All right, real quick to that point, Mariki.
Yep, so the CMAQ, we have a contract with them, right, to occupy 34% of that building?
No, we have a joint ownership agreement.
Okay.
We own a third of it, and they own two-thirds of it.
Okay, so does that play into,
Speak in the mic, Mr. Kaufman, speak a little closer.
Since you begin speaking, you know the mics in this room.
Apologize.
Thank you.
We jointly own the KMAC with the city. City owns two-thirds of it, we own one-third. So as we proceed with the civil justice system, we certainly hope we'll work out a friendly agreement for them to buy it or for us to both put it up for sale or what it is. But push comes to shove, law's on our side. A co-owner of a building can require a building be put up for sale if you can't work out another arrangement.
okay, I think the clerk would like some of that space when you move out of there, but, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Abel from our fiscal, and then Felicia, and I will remind you that we have not started the agenda items yet. So, Mr. Abel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. If everybody has in front of them the Office of Fiscal Agency Attachment A, we're going to be speaking from that. And what we tried to do was, as Commissioner Basham had indicated, there's a lot to digest here, 3 inches. So in order to look at it from 40, 50,000 feet, try to give you an overview of everything that's going on with the totality of all of the agreements. And I believe that, you know, a significant number of agreements. We wanted to look at the cost from different perspectives. One was the capital expenditure itself, and that's on the top portion of this analysis. Its sources and uses, and we divided it by each of the years for the next 3 years. And then the uses where the money will go, and that's a capital expenditure side. And then we also, on the bottom portion of it, we put the operations. So on an annual basis, what we can expect the cost to be from the contracts that are in front of us as well. And in the first year, it also highlights the budget adjustment that we're going to be looking at the tail end of the agenda. So the $35 million in the first year, $35,213,000 matches the budget adjustment that's being proposed. Now, Kevin Haney is very good at budgeting, and he's able to pluck monies from different sources within the general fund and other funds in order to come up with the money that's needed. We've kind of taken it into just 4 categories. If you look at the sources of funds, Pinnacle Aerospace excess tourist tax of $2.9 million. We're taking $11.9 million from Indigent Health, the airport parking tax. $15.4 million will be coming from the general fund. Again, various sources of the general fund, but ultimately from the general fund. And that's primarily, at least the first year, will be coming from the increased property taxes that we expected, that we actually discussed several months ago through the equalization process. We know that we had a 4.1% increase in assessed valuation in the county, and that is a large chunk of that that will be used for this purpose. And also, we're moving $5 million from the capital projects fund. Now, that comes to $35 million in year 1. Year 2, our airport parking tax for $3.3 million, excess tourist tax for $750,000, and then general fund for $72,000. For a total in year 2 of $4.1 million. Year 3, just $750,000 from the excess tourist tax. So that will be the sources of the money to pay for the CUP of approximately $40 million. Now, the $40 million is guaranteed maximum price. Now, as we had heard Judge Kaufman speak, that we expect that price will go down. The expectation is as they refine the agreement. But the contracts that we've been given that are in your packet come to a total of about $40 million. So you can see the uses are broken down between two parties. One is DTE for the central utility plant of $30.7 million, and then the backup power of $876,000. So those are the monies that will be paid to DTE. For ROC, the next three lines there come to about $8.5 million for the central utility plant shell, the facility maintenance building, and then some video arrangement locations. So those are basically the uses and the totality of the contracts for the capital expenditures themselves. Now, the bottom section of that analysis shows the annual operational costs that would be built into the budget on a going forward basis for a period of time. The operation and maintenance fee for the CUP is $1.75 million. You can see the annual cost and then the total contract, because it's a 20-year contract with increases that will be the lesser of the consumer price index or 5%. The $48 million assumes 5%. So we are on the very high range of that. The administration had done an analysis on the lower range of it. They say that might be $36 million and not $48 million. But again, that's kind of an unknown. We know that the first year will be $1,475,000. There's also in the documents that you'll be looking at a supply agreement for 3 years, approximately $64,000 a year for a total of $191,000. On electric power backup electrical line, $5,375 a month for 5 years. I'm sorry. So about $65,000 a year. And then we will be contracting with DTE to supply power. Now, this is an estimate based on their power structure, our rate structure. $1,658,000. The $1,658,000 is really going to be substitute power, because right now we're providing power for Frank Murphy Hall of Justice, Division I, Division II, and the JDF. And this is the power for all of those. I don't know what it'll be substituted. My expectation is that it'll be at least $1,658,000. We do know. Kevin and I were discussing this point earlier, that on a monthly basis, this totals $138,000 per month. Just Division I on a monthly basis is $42,000. So if we add the other three, Division II, the JDF, and Frank Murphy Hall of Justice, we should get up to $138,000, and that may actually be a savings. But incorporated in the documents that you're looking at, annual cost of $3.2 million with a total of $57 million. And I know also that Judge Kaufman is right. There was efficiencies that we were talking about. My understanding was that it's between $11 and $15 million once this criminal justice center becomes in full operation. He was saying $20 to $30 million. So we know that there is savings associated with it, and that has not been incorporated in here.
Okay, and again, that was a overview. Item number 8 will be the sources and certifying revenue and decertifying revenue to get to these numbers, and we'll get questions when we get to that. But I just wanted Mark to give you the high-level overview of the financials that we're going to have to consider as well today. And lastly, but not least, Ms. Johnson, do you have legal perspective you'd like to share before we get into item number 1?
A very few quick points with regards to these agreements. So you have seven agreements before you to construct the CUP, for operation and maintenance, to install some power lines, and to provide gas and electric service. You'll also see some amendments to the parking agreement and the Gratiot lease. Many of these agreements, if you go through your packet, will not look like the standard county contracts. Many of them are DTEs, I would say standard forms. To Commissioner Basham's point earlier, the main agreement, which is I think item 2 on the agenda has an audit clause, but the other agreements, again, are not county standard forms. Many of them flow into the main agreement, so you won't see an audit clause in all of them. We had a few legal concerns that have been addressed and resolved. There are at least 2 other items that I think we have differing viewpoints on, and I'll point those out as we go through the agreements.
All right. All right, thank you. Let us now go to new business. Madam Clerk, item number 1.
Item D1, requesting commission approval of amendment number 1 to the development and purchase and sale agreement between the Charter County of Wayne and the Wayne County Building Authority, Rock Development Company, and Rock Economic Development Group.
Okay, so, James, Richard?
Sure.
Go ahead. This is $8.4 million for the exterior shell.
So as I indicated, there's 2 contracts that directly relate to the building of the cup. And once we agreed that DTE was the best partner to build it, there were months and many, many sessions to talk about the best way to build the cup. It was decided the best way to build it was to go through the definitive agreement, the basic agreement for Rock to build the cup, and have them build the shell, because the shell was attuned to the overall project more than the inside equipment in the cup. And so this first contract is it's the amendment, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's the amendment to the definitive agreement that does a number of things. One of them is to have Barton Malow build the shell, and of the 37 million-ish guaranteed maximum price, this is part of that number. This agreement has a number of other things that had to be negotiated between Rock and the county because building the cup affected those provisions, and all of those that were affected by that were negotiated and placed in this agreement. And this agreement also has yeah. Plus, there's unrelated things in here too that came up as part of the building of it, like some disagreements with what was Rock required to cover under its FF&E list, its furnitures, fixtures, and equipment. And this amendment has the resolution to those issues that we think was very favorable to the county, that we do not anticipate these amended changes will cost the county anymore and have a high likelihood of covering certain cost by Rock's requirements under their FF&E list. The basic difference is that instead of each line, take televisions, there was a number associated next to it. Rock's position was that was an allowance, and if you went above it, county, that was your responsibility. Our position was, no, we didn't know enough at the time we agreed to those numbers to know what it would cost according to the specifications to give us a state-of-the-art facility that required X number of TVs. So the resolution that was worked out was, instead of the existing requirement that you couldn't use one line item for another, we've now taken all the numbers that were in the F&E, aggregated them, and we can use that aggregated amount for any of the items in the FF&E. And our wonderful team, headed by Steve Ohm from CGL, who in my opinion has done a wonderful job so far keeping Rock and therefore Barton, Malo, and HOK to their detailed requirements of what they're required to do, has a high degree of confidence that the money available to us now to cover all those FF&E things are sufficient and will prevent any necessity for arguments on any particular one.
Questions? Commissioner Marecki? No? Sorry. Commissioner Kling?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since it involves the parking spaces, remind me, we're going down by a few parking spaces. Who's getting these parking spaces and what are they paying for them? If you can remind me, please.
I'll look to James for the specific numbers. The original concept is that if Rock operates them or we decide to get our own operator, there are limitations on what can be charged, and including how many of the 1,500, now 1,360-ish, will be dedicated to monthly parking for employees, and what can be charged by the operator to those employees. We have not yet had the discussion of whether or not the county is going to subsidize any of those monthly charges.
Well, that's what I was wondering about, is there was the option for the county to
Yeah,
step
and
in on some
I
of the
think there's
costs.
a good chance we may decide that it makes more sense to pay Rock off and operate it ourselves. Because on the parking concession agreement that this body approved, we are responsible to pay them $30 million at prime plus one. And prime plus one is probably 4, 5, 6% if you're guessing what it's going to be for the next 20 years, is it? Because we have a 20 years, whereas hopefully our rainy day fund balance, whatever we call the money that used to be a deficit that now is a surplus, which is about 146 million, we get less than 1% on that. So assuming our fiscal situation is pretty much the same, that we're above this 100 million mark that I'm told is what you don't want to get below, because then you start risking your bond rating. If we're in a position to pay this off with money we're only getting about 1% or less for money we'd be paying 4, 5, 6% on, I think in a couple years, we may come to this body and ask for the ability to do that, and then we get to operate it ourselves, and which we think we can do as
But
efficient.
as we stand here today, because we're not taking that right now, maybe in the
We
future.
we have until 6 months before.
That's right, 180.
180 days. So we have until 180 days before the Criminal Justice Center is supposed to open to tell them that we're going to pay you the 30 million and operate it ourselves. And so that would be the critical time for us to make that decision by.
But as we stand here today,
Right, and until we
It's
do
Rock.
that, they're going to be operating it.
and any of the spaces for, are judges paying for their spaces over there?
That's such an
we
issue.
currently
They,
stand?
you know, they pay for judges' spaces through their own budget. The county does not
okay.
directly pay it.
Okay. Are the public going to have any free spaces? Are the public's going to have to pay for their spaces coming in to Rock, and our employees are going to have to pay to Rock for their parking spaces as well? Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. But none of that's changed so far?
Correct.
We got to look at the option down the road, which...
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I have a quick question. 7.2 is the cost of the exterior building, according to our analysis. 1.1 is for facilities maintenance building, and then 105,000 for 5 video arraignment locations. That's how they got to the $8.4 million. So I'm just understanding the breakdown.
Yes.
So the actual cup itself is 7.2, plus what's the 1.1 facilities maintenance building? Is that something else?
Yes. Part of the budget for the CJC included, I think it was 1.6 million in order to build a facilities building to house all our tradespeople, a couple hundred who fix all our buildings. Most of the buildings we now will have to fix will be in the Criminal Justice Center. So in deciding to move the cup and the efficiencies, there was great operational efficiencies, according to Tom Kelly, who heads up our facilities maintenance division, if the facilities maintenance building was on the same site as the Criminal Justice Center. In analyzing the operational costs going forward versus the 1.6 allowance that we were given, because they had planned to put the facilities building across the street somewhere, maybe half a mile away. The cost to move the facilities maintenance building on site right next to the cup was 1.1 million more than the 1.6 million allowance. We made a determination that the operational savings going forward more than justified that additional capital cost, and that's what we're asking you to approve.
Okay, so that's an additional cost that wasn't originally,
Correct.
so a total of 2.7 if you add the 1.6 and the 1.1. And then the video arrangement locations, that's, I think we spoke of earlier, those are rooms that we're going to have in the building, and that's additional as well,
In the jail, yes.
in the jail? Okay.
So you should think of this agreement as just kind of throwing in all of the miscellaneous items that we had with Rock. But those last two you mentioned are not related to the cup at all.
But these are things that we're paying for.
Correct.
Not Rock.
Correct.
Commissioner Basham?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. It was mentioned that the administration was okay with the audit, but there's an omission of items number 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Is the administration okay? And I appreciate the cooperation with the administration and the legislative body. Are they okay with the auditing items number 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7?
Yeah, it was my understanding that those agreements included requirements for the same auditing requirements as definitive agreement, but I'll let James speak to that.
So item number 3, just trying to, which one it is, do you have it listed as?
I'll be
So for instance, that's a coordination agreement which spells out how Rock, the county, and DTE Energy Services will work together. So there's not really funds which will be spent through that coordination agreement in the same way, for instance, as item number 2, the Energy Services Agreement between the county and DTE Energy Services.
But internal audits is not just strictly funds, it's efficiency. So you're okay with if the Auditor General and her staff want to audit items number 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7?
We'd have no concern with that.
So that's a
We'd have no
yes.
concern with that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Commissioner Anderson?
So we're still on 1.
Number 1.
Right, that's what I was thinking. But I wanted to make sure. There was and I apologize if that was covered already, but I see we're reducing the number of parking spaces, but we're going to be paying Rock more money. Was that in an answer? Well, it says we're going to increase the total amount from the agreement from $401 million, 300,000 to 409,776, 617 under item 1 under our analysis.
I assume that's the amount to cover their contract to build the shell of the cup.
Okay.
Yeah.
About reducing the parking spaces, so it's not related to the lost parking spaces in any way?
Related.
Okay, because that's sort of the way I took it. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Webb.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm looking at the fiscal analysis done by our fiscal director as it relates to the sources that are going to be used to fund this CUP. And the one that concerns me most is the 11.8 million from Indigent Health. So has anybody taken a look at how that is going to impact those that depend on it?
So those dollars are right now being reserved in fund balance as restricted fund balance for future use, and this is a eligible future use that we can use them for. Basically, what the plan is that the infirmary of the jail can be used, or we can use airport parking tax and cigarette tax money for the building of the infirmary. And what we're going to be doing is we will take these dollars and use them for the infirmary, and the general bonds that were going to be used for the infirmary can be shifted and now be used for the CUP.
So it sounds like you have legal means by which to allocate these funds, so that won't be a problem. But the impact on the people that are dependent upon the indigent healthcare funds, there's no way to make up the detriment it's going to cause to
There's going to be no impact. There is going to be absolutely no impact. Right now, the dollars that are being used for the indigent care, airport parking taxes, all of the programs are going to be fully funded.
So you can pull this $11.8 million out of indigent health and it's not going to impact
These
it.
are dollars that were reserved in fund balance. They weren't spent. So
We're not cutting a single cent from any indigent care program we are operating now.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Commissioner Clark Coleman.
Question. On the operation of this CUP, who will be the workers who will be running this or maintaining this? Will it be DTE or will it be our own employees?
DTE.
Okay, so they will be the ones that will be operating that plant.
Correct.
Is there any plans maybe to train our employees to do that?
So.
Or is it so technical?
Yes. In our opinion, this certainly was an issue we discussed. This CUP we are building is quite a technological gem. Lots of issues in terms of what happens when power goes down. And anyway, lots of discussions I understood almost zero of. But we made the decision that the expertise of Edison employees running the CUP, given our investment of $380, $400 million in a $600 million project, was a wise thing to do. This is only tangentially related to your question because I can't tell you how to split up these numbers to answer your question, but overall, we presently pay approximately $4 million to operate and maintain the utilities of all the buildings that are going to be replaced by the Criminal Justice Center.
Okay.
Our cost for DTE to run the CUP, which is all the utilities for the entire CJC, I think is 1.475
Yes.
million.
How much?
1.475.
Okay.
Our estimate of the cost of the utilities to run all these buildings annually is about 2.5 million. And these were estimated by Joe Moylan, and I told him to be conservative. These aren't guarantees, but this is our best educated view that it's going to be $1,475,000 to operate and maintain, and about $2.5 million the cost of the utilities. Presently, it costs us about $4 million to operate and maintain the buildings that are going to be replaced. And the 3-year average of the cost of utilities for those is about $4.8 million. So I am not saying that that difference between operations has to do with how wonderful Edison is necessarily and how bad ours are, because I don't believe that at all. But there is a part of those numbers that had to do with us deciding it was important to get what we really thought was the best to operate and maintain the utilities here.
So the savings would come in the highly technical type of operation we're looking at?
Well, to some extent. I mean, when I add up those two numbers, it's 8.8 the present cost, about 4 million going to be the future cost. Almost half of that is because we're going to have more efficient buildings, not needing to use as much energy to run. But a little more than the other half of it has to do with the operating and maintaining of that. And it's important to get that right, and we did believe the expertise of Edison was worth it.
Okay.
Okay. All right, Commissioner Baker McCormick.
Thank you. The parking lot, is this a lot or a structure that's being built?
They're all surface lots.
Okay. And there is a cost to park for the public. Do we know what that cost is at this
Yeah,
point?
the definitive agreement has a schedule of what are the maximum charges that can be charged.
Okay, great. And what would that be?
We'll pull that
We
for
can,
you.
we can get that for you.
Okay, great. Do you know offhand if it's like $25 or?
Well, for the monthly for employees, I think was 150.
Well, really, I'm concerned about the public
Public?
when they come to court.
120.
Is there a major cost?
We'll provide, we'll get you the schedule,
Okay.
and we'll give you a hard copy of it and let you know, Commissioner.
We can get it to you by this afternoon.
Yeah.
Okay, and the Rock is leasing, no, the county is leasing Division 1 and Division 2 at this point, right now?
No.
No? When does that start and how much?
6
would we-
months after the Criminal Justice Center is completed and ready to move in. So we got 6 months from the time they give us a center that's ready to use to get our butts out of all the other buildings and not incur any rent. If we're not out by those 6 months,
Then we would-
the rent starts. I don't know offhand, it's a lot of money. We certainly are hoping we never get to that.
Right.
And they wanted us to be out in 30 days, and we wanted a year, but we think 6 months. Everybody's
Should
telling
be.
us 6 months should be sufficient time to move all our people over there.
Okay. And so for public parking, we did agree on a maximum amount, and that amount you would say is affordable. I know you're looking for it, but,
We negotiated something we thought was hopefully affordable, and when the commission approved it implicitly, they thought it was.
so if you're an indigent person coming to court, does any of that, was any of that taken into consideration?
We basically looked at what we were doing now, and put it into the agreement, except with the fact that what's going on now, it's Murphy Hall of Justice is mostly private parking lots across the street where people pay a lot of money. I think these numbers are not higher than and probably less than what's being charged now. As we get closer to opening this facility up, I think we all have an interest in having people that have to come to court who don't have very much money, paying as little as they can to park. And I would think as we're getting closer to this opening within a year or 6 months, it's definitely something we're going to look at in terms of our finance. And I would like to do something with our employees too. But we got some county employees there. We got sheriff, we got clerk people, and then we got court employees. And so the policy on parking here has been one of the more interesting things I've come across since I got in this job. When the issue came up when we sold, what was it?
511.
No, not 511 Woodward.
640?
640 Temple. And we had to move the clerk and all her people out of a place that had enough free parking without an issue. And we forced her to move to the Monroe Building, which saved the county money. But now the people who worked there, the Register of Deeds and other county offices, their employees had been paying whatever they could find on the street. So when I searched for the county policy on parking, I found nothing written, and I looked at the situation, and the answer is yes, we do have a policy. Depends upon where you work, and good luck. That's our policy. So, with certain exceptions, when we own the First Street parking lot, we subsidize people in the Guardian Building and those in Monroe who want to use it. So the normal monthly charge we could get there of $200, $250, we just require them to pay $60, and the county takes care of the rest. We own it, so we don't have to pay ourselves, but we're actually subsidizing each of those employees to the tune of whatever the market is, minus 60. One of my hopes is that as we finish projects like the Criminal Justice Center and we start saving significant money, one of my high priorities is making parking easier, cheaper, and maybe free. It's one of the best ways I think you can compensate an employee. They got no choice. It's tax-free, giving them to them. But you don't change things overnight in a county that's had a parking policy of good luck where you work and what you can find. I do think we need to change it, but, and this will be an opportunity for us together, I think, to look what we want to do with respect to these employees. And the clerk was certainly not happy when I said, I don't know how I can treat you any differently than everybody else in the county whose parking is determined by where they work. And she wasn't happy, but she accepted it. But I think this is a wonderful goal to do something better than that policy.
So the 30 million that we could potentially buy the parking structure or parking area, and that's 1 year, right, after it's built? Is it 6 months, 1 year?
180 days before it's scheduled to open, we can pay them off and say we're going to run it.
And we have to pay them, like, completely off? Okay. All right, thank you.
But if we're in a position to do that, and all of a sudden, we have no obligation on these lots and we own them, we look at our fiscal position, we're in a much better position to try to improve our parking policy than what we have now.
Or
Then anything
own the
we do
lot.
with the CJC, we're going to have to look countywide, so other employees don't think we're treating them unfair because we're doing too much there. So-
Felicia had a answer to your question about the parking. Felicia?
So through the chair, for the Criminal Justice Center, ROC is required to set aside 800 parking spaces for employees. The maximum amount they can charge is $125 a month, and that will go up, I believe, $5 a year. With regards to the general public in those parking spaces, we did not agree upon an actual rate. The contract says that ROC, the rates that are charged by ROC cannot exceed, we have to be consistent with market rates. So whatever the market rates are for the general downtown area, those are the rates that they could charge the public to park at the Criminal Justice Center. Also, to your point with regards to the lease, so the county does not own, we sold Division I jail, Division II jail, Frank Murphy, and JDF to ROC, so we do not own them. Technically, we have a lease for $1 a year currently. So to answer, so I hope that clarified your points.
That did. So with the public, they could potentially pay $25 to park, basically. And is there, I can't see the area right now, but is there other parking lots around the, or will?
Not presently.
No.
Okay,
Some may spring up based on demand.
right.
So, I mean,
Okay.
what we basically did is have the same availability for the public to park at the new facility that there is for the old facility, but with the opportunity for between now and the time it opens, for us to work together to do something different that treats the public and our employees better.
Right, well, I guess I'm just concerned that they'll have a monopoly on parking in that, ROC, in that area, and there's not a lot of options to park, so, thank you.
Yes, you're right. Commissioner Haydes.
Thank you. I have two questions. One of them more likely a comment. The first question is the utility center. It have some protection from power outage? If we have an outage, is there any inside of it?
You talking about the maintenance building or the whole?
The whole complex?
Yeah,
We
so
have a
there's,
power failure.
so one of the contracts that you're going to be reviewing is, we're going to be building two separate lines coming to the CUP from two different substation, DTE substations, such that if our main line were to fail for whatever reason, that we would have an alternative. Then there's also backup generated power, that if the whole system were to go down for, area-wide outage for whatever reason, we would have the ability to power the most essential aspects of the CJC through backup generation.
Thank you on that. I hope we have the utility center figure with the Justice Center you talk about, the $200 million, instead of wait till the end, like we did with this one. We prevent another extra cost. My concern with the parking, as Commissioner McCormick mentioned, and I know the court have a problem with the response from the jury duty Simmons. People I've been told by Judge Colombo when he used to be the chief judge, is they send around 80-some thousand Simmons. They only get less than 30 respond. And most of it, they've been asking a question. A lot of people think they pay for parking more than what you pay them. In fact, the cost, it's twice as more. And I know the county, by creating the Justice Center and we move to a new facility, we're saving a lot of money. And it's the taxpayers' money. I think the public deserve to feel some of the saving or benefit from some of the saving. I'm not telling you to give all the saving back to the public, but at least the jury duty should have some fair treatment on the parking. And we need to enhance the response from the public to the jury duty. It's very honorable thing to do. So, but we need to look into some of those things and let the public know we save some money by creating a new system, new facility. And the benefit and it's the people gonna benefit out of it, and the employee will benefit out of it. And I think there's room for all of us, for the county to save money, and for the public to feel some of the saving been given back to them. That's my comment.
We look forward to working with you to achieve those things.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Clean.
Thanks for letting me come back a second time, Madam Chair. I'd like to ask Commission Counsel, on page 3 of 5 of the committee analysis we received today, I know administration doesn't have it, but it'll come obvious to you in just a sec here. You cast some doubt as to Rock Economic Development Group being the named party in this, since this is an amendment to the original development and purchase agreement. Do you still have those concerns, Council? And what do you see as the difficulty, if you still have those concerns? What kind of potential, is there potential blowback, legal blowback in the future for this? Just, I'd like to hear Council out on this.
Through the chair, yes, those concerns still exist. So when the original agreements for the criminal justice complex were submitted, you had the main agreement, which was the $500 million agreement, and that agreement was presented with several exhibits. One was the parking exhibit, one was the Gratiot lease, and all of those had individual separate ROC entities. So ROC created an entity for every aspect of this project, one for the main, one for parking, one for the Gratiot lease, and I think there were one or two others. But those were presented as exhibits to the main agreement. So this, what you have before you now, is an amendment to the main agreement, but ROC Economic Development Group was not a party to the original main agreement. They were only a party to the Gratiot lease. And so what this agreement proposes is to add them as a party to this amendment. And it's not clear to me from a legal perspective how you can merely add them as a party when they weren't a party to the original. They were a party to a separate agreement that was presented as an exhibit to this one. So it's just not clear to me how you're amending, adding them as a party and then amending that exhibit when we don't have any other documentation. So that was the concern, and I'll give you a contrast to that. You'll also see attached to this agreement that there's also an amendment to the parking, which everyone has been talking about, and ROC created a separate legal entity for parking. It was called ROC Parking or something. They actually provide you an amendment to ROC Parking, a physical amendment document, modification document that you would normally see, and they do not add ROC Parking as a party to this agreement. So it's not clear why, one, we're doing them different. The way they're treating ROC Economic Development Group, again, is not clear to me from a legal perspective how you're just adding them. And if the argument is that is legally appropriate to add them to this agreement, then I guess the counter argument would be then ROC Economic Development Group is now responsible for all, they're a party to the main agreement in all of those terms, which was clearly not the intent of ROC at the time, because they created 5 separate legal entities. So that was the issue I expressed to Corp Counsel. They disagree, and the agreement wasn't revised to address that.
Council, does that mean potentially this contract could be considered null and void without those changes?
I'm not sure.
Or without whatever needs to be done in your mind?
I'm not sure that a court would say the entire agreement will be null and void. Potentially those provisions related to the lease, potentially, yes. I would imagine that if all the parties are in agreement, you may never get to that point. But from a legal perspective, again, just adding a party to the main agreement in an amendment, it's just not clear to me how we do that.
Thank you, Council.
Could you respond to that?
Sure. I'm going to let outside counsel, Mr. McNaughton.
You can speak at the podium.
So the only issue.
Name and record for the title.
Sorry,
Name and
Matthew
title for the record.
McNaughton, outside counsel for the county. The only issue in the First Amendment to the definitive agreement involving the lease is in an instance where potentially if DTE did not finish the cup in time for ROC to continue its work on the project, then the period of time in which the county would not be paying any money under the lease could extend by 1 year. So that's the only issue involving the lease. So the entity who's the party to the lease is just signing the amendment saying, yes, we agree that if this event occurs, we will not charge the county any additional rent for that up to one period of time. I don't see this as adding them as a party to the entire agreement. Rather, it is just indicating their agreement to that specific issue. And I do not see any legal problem with that at all.
Commissioner?
You know, I learned when we first started the jail stuff a decade ago or so, whatever, how these companies create endless LLCs for each individual little thing that they do. And that makes it a little difficult. Let me ask you this, given your answer, counsel, that tells me that the other parties in the original agreement don't have to pay any attention to this then? That it's only this one party said, no, we're not going to give you trouble. That all of these other entities are not bound by the same thing then. Am I correct in that, counsel? Doing my amateur legal
I'm not
work here?
exactly sure where you're going when you say the other parties.
Well, it was suggested by counsel here that we don't really have to, you know, all these folks are doing is to saying if this thing goes bad, we're not going to hold you responsible. This specific entity, the ROCA Economic Development Group, is saying we're not going to hold you. Is that what you're telling me?
I apologize if I was unclear, Commissioner. The obligation that we're discussing
Right.
is the obligation under the lease, which ROC Economic Development Group is the party to the lease. And so there's an amendment to a particular provision of that lease, which would allow the county to stay in those facilities for an additional year without paying any money. And it is the entity that's also signing the amendment, indicating its contractual agreement to that provision. So I think what we're talking about is more of a technical difference of opinion on this. I mean, I'm perfectly comfortable that when the leasing entity signs this First Amendment, that it will be bound by the terms of that agreement and that it is an amendment to the lease that it signed. And no one else has the ability to enforce those obligations. Only this entity that's signed the original lease and that's signing this amendment will be able to enforce that obligation.
In layman's terms, the question I think Felicia had was, why is ROC Economic Development in this and they weren't in the previous? And can they be taken out of this because they weren't in the previous? Is there a harm to take ROC Economic Development out of this piece because they were not in the previous agreement?
They were in the lease, which is what we're trying to protect against with this amendment.
So by putting them in this amendment, you're protecting the lease arrangement?
Because we're altering the lease that they originally signed. They have rights under that lease, and so by signing this agreement, they are saying we are agreeing to the change in the lease that would allow the county to avoid paying rent for up to 1 year in the event that there was a delay in our moving out of the facilities.
Okay, and Felicia,
You summarized it correctly. ROC Economic Development is not a party to the development and purchase agreement, which is what you're looking at. They are party to the lease agreement. They added ROC Economic Development to this purchase and development agreement to accomplish an amendment to the lease. From a legal perspective, again, it's not clear to me how you add a party to an agreement they were not originally a party to accomplish an amendment to a separate agreement with separate legal entities. I understand that that was an exhibit, and I didn't agree with the way it was presented originally. However, it's just not clear to me. I hear council's position. If all the parties agree, hopefully this will never come back. But again, you're adding them as a party to the development and purchase agreement. They're no longer isolated and a party only to the lease. They're adding them as a party to this to accomplish an amendment to something else. And it's just not clear to me why they didn't amend the lease like they did when they amended the parking agreement to avoid any legal concerns or issues, but this was the way it was presented, and it's just not clear to me how and why how we do that.
And can we do that? Just amend the lease part and put Rock Economic Development in the lease portion?
So let me ask this. You're, as outside counsel, you're satisfied there's no concern there, but if Felicia gave us language to solve her concern, do you think there would be any objection from Rock or those companies?
I doubt it. That's the way it was presented to us originally, but I doubt that there would be a concern.
So, I would suggest, if it's okay with the commission and the chair and Felicia, that if you wanted to,
Why are you shaking your head?
Because now what you're suggesting is I'm going to draft that amendment on behalf of the administration to submit to the committee. Now, if we want to give Felicia that latitude, I'll take that and run with it for other things, but I'm pretty sure that's not what the role you normally
I'm
would give me.
specifically saying that if you have a point of concern as an experienced lawyer, the administration has absolutely no concern about it, but in order to provide everybody comfort, if this seems like a simple matter, the easiest way to make sure we have something that satisfies everything is for you to tell us how you want it to be changed in order to remove any concern, and then let us take it to Rock this afternoon and get their agreement.
Is that?
We're not gonna get out of here this afternoon.
Don't say that, Drew. We pray to get out of here this afternoon. Is that amenable to you? Okay, we'll talk, so, thank you. We'll work on the specifics to satisfy our council's concern. Commissioner Colleen, then, I think to that point, Commissioner Basham.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on this, and outside counsel, and I forget your name, sir, and I apologize. No amount of explanation is going to help me. I have to go to my lawyer when I hear these arguments. You mentioned that something, that it wasn't presented that way originally. Did you mean commission counsel's objections and the questions she sent over? Or did you mean, well, is that what you meant? You didn't understand what our counsel's concerns and objections were?
I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to, but no, I did not. I did not mean that. I did not have any problems with the question or didn't understand the question.
Based on that, are you able to draft something then? And now that you understand the concern, or, because I think counsel's point is right, you don't want us, I mean, we'll happily draft stuff for you guys, but I don't think that's necessarily the way it works. Are you able to address that in some language now?
There is a way to address that concern,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So I think we have a pathway. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you, and we'll work on that between now and 10 o'clock tomorrow. Commissioner Basham?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I was paying attention, and quite frankly, I heard outside counsel opining. I heard our commission counsel sort of disagreeing with the opining. I heard Mr. Kaufman talking about getting us there and agreeing to get there. I appreciate the willingness of the administration to work with us. And if this continues, it helps us peel this back and move forward, even though it's not laconic. But anyway, if the item that we have concerns about is addressed by whoever, it moves us on to the next step. So I appreciate that. So I really, if I see it in writing now, I don't have any concerns with that part of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Baydun.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to go back to the issue Commissioner Baker McCormick was talking about, the concern of the parking and the challenges for the public. Is there access to public transportation to the new center?
Yes.
Is there?
Yes. Within my district, it's
Okay.
good transportation.
I ride past there. We can't hear you. On that point, yes, there's transportation, and I take the bus to work a couple times a month. I ride past that.
Okay, good,
I
thanks.
mean, if this is such thing as good transportation, of course, we want rail transportation, we want massive, but it's on the top of public, yes.
And as the former head of SMART for 3 years, hopefully the increased amount of people using that area will cause them to adjust their routes and frequencies to better serve the area.
It's a deduct.
Is that smart or dead?
Well, but hopefully they do the same good practice as we did at SMART.
Okay.
I mean,
All right, Commissioner Ware, Vice Chair Pro Tem Ware.
Madam Chair.
Turn your microphone. Yes. Turn it, yes, okay.
Lightberg. I move approval of D1. I need to add, if Felicia works out the amendment for D1, based on that, I'm moving approval. Or additional information. Is it an amendment or additional information?
Just need a revision to this.
A revision, okay, revision.
Revision to the amendment.
Revision to the amendment. Thank you, attorneys.
It's been moved and supported. Any further discussion on item D1? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? One nay, any abstentions? Okay, ayes have it. Thank you. Next item, please. And I will just preface next item by saying at 12:30, we're going to break for lunch and then come back at about 12:45, 12:50. Next item.
Item D2 is requesting commission approval of a 20-year comparable source energy services agreement with a 5-year option to renew between the Charter County of Wayne and DTE Russell Street LLC for DTE Russell Street LLC to build a central utility plant to support the Wayne County Criminal Justice Center at a cost not to exceed $30,719,000.
So this is the big one.
Yeah, this is the heart of all these agreements. This is the one to build the cup other than the outer shell, to buy the millions of dollars of equipment, to install it, and to have a state-of-the-art cup to run our state-of-the-art criminal justice center. This is the main agreement between the county and DTE and provides for DTE building about 2/3 of the cup, provides them for, to operate it and maintain it, and to hook up with this is DTE-ES, DTE Energy Service, and they will hook up with DTE Electric and DTE Gas to provide the utilities for the operating center.
Why is it a 20-year agreement?
Thought it was better than 19 or 21.
I mean, we'll have to have energy indefinitely, so I'm just wondering why there's a time frame on it.
Others can speak better to that, but we wanted a long-term agreement, something we could rely on. DTE wanted that to know we weren't going to kick them out after a couple years, but we didn't want it to be forever. Who knows what comes on the horizon during that times with other competing entities, with other ways to get energy, who knows?
Yeah, solar panels, yeah.
So anything to add to that?
No, that's, it's.
Any questions on item number 2? Commissioner Anderson?
I just wanted to explain, because this is one of the major parts of that agreement that I have the greatest problem with, that we're going to be paying 93.5% of the cost of the cup. And so I will be a no vote.
Commissioner Marecki, the Commissioner Webb.
Thank you. In our analysis and the highlights, it says it's difficult to ascertain the full cost of this agreement. There are numerous provisions and definitions that include costs, but a full breakdown of all costs is not included in the agreement. It appears this agreement will cost over $80 million.
What page are you on?
I'm on page, it's a second page, it's a first page, under committee analysis. Under highlights, the second one. So I'm just wondering what that,
Oh, highlights. That was,
Me.
okay.
So, and I'm gonna refer just over to Mark, because we did request some additional information that we got, I think, late sometime yesterday, and Mark was, I'm gonna refer to fiscal, because there is, the reason for the comment is because unlike most agreements, you'll have one section that'll give you the grand total cost. This agreement has costs in several sections and areas, and some costs were incorporated into other items, and it just wasn't clear to staff as we were reviewing it what we were dealing with. We did request additional information. We did receive that additional information, and I'm gonna look over to my colleague to talk about that additional information since he's the numbers guy.
Thank you, Felicia, and through the chair. The reason for the $80 million is because this takes into consideration, again, what I had discussed earlier, both the CapEx, which is the hard cost, one-time cost to construct, and the operation and maintenance on a going-forward basis. So the issue with flexibility or uncertainty deals with a provision in the arrangement on the operation and maintenance that it's going to be the lesser of consumer price index or 5%. Now, we incorporated in our analysis, assuming the maximum of 5%, it would be $48 million. The administration has done an analysis assuming something less than that, using inflation numbers, and say that it could be as low as $36 million. So perhaps a better indicator of it would be a range on the operation maintenance, somewhere between 36 and $48 million, but it will be between those two numbers. I agree that it will probably not be 48 because CPI has not reached 5% in a long time. As far as the detail of the $1,475,000, we were given that by the administration. I believe that it's incorporated in your packet. I'm trying to get my hands on it. Terrence, do you see that number? That detail?
Through the chair, I don't believe that the breakdown of the 1.475, we just received that late yesterday afternoon, of what those what it consists of. So the commissioners may not have that detailed breakdown of the 1.475.
Okay, I do have it here. It's labor, 0.75 million, maintenance, 0.24 million, G&A, I don't know what G&A home is, 0.125, a fee of 0.35 million for a total of $1.475 million. And this is, again, their O&M fee on an annual basis.
so Mark, are you saying, like the sheet that you gave us on the bottom, the total overall contracts, it could possibly be 97 million. Are you talking about this 80
It includes,
million?
yes, it includes that.
It could, so
It
it's.
includes that. And with, again, you have to understand that the biggest chunk of this is the CapEx, the capital expenditure part of it, which is, $40 million, assuming guaranteed maximum price. The rest of it will be part of our budget on a going forward basis. And our budget will be covered significantly by costs that we're already paying now and savings that we anticipate once we open up the Criminal Justice Center.
Okay.
So again, the big point is that there's a range of costs that we're agreeing to, and it could be for the operation and maintenance as low as 36 million, as much as 48 million. We've incorporated the higher.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And if I may, the range that we were talking about, the low end is 2.2%, which is the historical inflation factor for the county for the last 20 years. So Scott Vandermeer of Assessment basically uses that percentage when he does his inflation factors and things like that. But he's got to track it back to 20 years, and that's the rate. The current rate, which, again, I think Mark alluded to in the assessment when he did his study for the assessments back in May, is 2.6%, which is a little bit higher, which is a good thing from the county standpoint. This would be a bad thing for these guys, is for this point of view, if 2.2 is the actual number. The max is going to be 5%, so.
Yeah, right. Okay, I saw that. All right, thank you.
Okay, and just to be clear, the $30 million in this item number 2 is with the county and DTE to build the actual facility? Or and all of the wiring that goes into it, or just the-
Everything other than the outside
Everything
shell.
other than the shell. This is everything other than the shell. And then the 1.4 per year is the annual adjustments on inflation for, that's the cost, the power cost, essentially.
Operation and maintenance.
Operation and maintenance. We don't know, you don't know what the operational and maintenance is currently
Yes.
for Division 1, 2, and 3.
Well, for all the buildings
All the-
that
Well, buildings that we're moving over to that site.
place, the operation and maintenance is 4.4 million.
4 million for all the, currently, that's what we're paying.
Yes.
Mark?
Are we suggesting that this 1.4 will be substituting for, there will probably be additional operation and maintenance, but
Unanticipated, this is going to be what is operating the utilities. And any additional things would be things that we did not include in what it costs us now to operate the utilities at these buildings.
So a savings of roughly 3 million, 2.5, $2.8 million,
3.5, correct?
3.5. Say it again.
No.
No.
That's based on our current, what we're using, what we're doing currently, and what we anticipated the new to be. Okay. Any further conversation, discussion, Commissioner Webb?
Thanks. Yeah, just for the record, I just want to state my position because I'm always the lone no vote on this project, but that's okay. I just need it to be on the record as to why I feel the way I feel. When we were looking into this, something that I knew that had to happen, and we had 2 options. One was to go with Walsh, and the other one was to go in this direction. From the time they chose to go in this direction, I have voted no. So in the name of consistency, I will be voting no on these items. I don't want it to be a reflection to DTE or any of the outside counsel or any of the people that have worked on this effort on the items that are before us today. Former utility distribution person, the idea of setting the building up next to the facility rather than doing it long distance, all those things make sense. So I'm not a no vote in opposition to some of the specifics that are in these contracts today, but rather of the bigger picture. I don't support selling taxpayer-owned property without independent appraisals. I don't believe in embarking on construction projects without going out for bid. I don't support building buildings that we don't need when there's buildings that we do need. And, you know, I knew that this was going to end up costing the taxpayers, you know, additional monies. It's closing in on $1 billion. And, you know, we've already taken everything from our retirees and our employees, and you know, our operations are suffering terribly. If this bull market we're in, that's already been going on for nearly 10 years, you know, does what the economy traditionally does, and puts us back into a recession, even if it's flat. I was here when we had a $35 million a year budget deficit. Even if it doesn't put us into that place again, I really don't think that the savings are going to be enough to substantiate this kind of investment. I think this is a project that could have been completed for about $391 million or less, and is now going to cost us over $1 billion. So I'm going to be a no vote on all these items. I just wanted the people that are here that are new to this process to know that my no votes don't have to do with your role or any discredit to DTE. I think they do a phenomenal job at everything they do. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Baydun. You pass? Okay, Commissioner Vice Chair Ware.
Thank you. I know that this process is difficult for us because it's kind of coming to us at the last minute, but I also know that certain services that we have to provide for the Wayne County Justice Center, but especially the part of the Justice Center house our inmates. So I think we're doing a very good job today trying to get past this. And on that point, I move approval.
Moved and supported. Any discussion on item number 2? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Commissioner Webb? Commissioner Webb? Any opposed?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, okay, thank you.
Yes, he said yes, he said yes, yes.
2 opposed, any abstentions? Hearing none, item passed. Thank you. Jim, is the food ready?